Hi, my name is Yasser. On behalf of my fellow global IELTS trainers, Layla, Sarah, Louisa, Daniela, and Aiden, I would like to welcome you to the British Council IELTS microsite. The purpose of this site is to give you access to tools and resources that you can use to start practicing and preparing for the IELTS test on your own. So you will find a series of detailed self-study guides, links, and explanatory videos like this one to help you start your journey of self-study. This is the first in a series of 8 videos, each with a specific focus. The purpose of this video is to give you a broad introduction to the IELTS test. This is a complete list of the videos along with a suggested viewing order. We highly recommend that you watch the first 3 videos and the last one in this specific sequence. You have a bit more flexibility in terms of the self-study guide videos. You can choose to follow the sequence that you see up on your screen right now, or you can choose to start with the skill or skills that you feel you need to spend more time preparing for. Each video has questions and mini quizzes, so it would be a good idea for you to grab a piece of paper or a notebook and a pen or pencil so that you can write your answers down and take notes. So if you haven't already, please pause the video now and go get something to write with and something to write on. As I mentioned before, the focus of this specific video is to give you a broad introduction to the IELTS test. So we're going to do this by getting a quick overview of the IELTS test. We're going to talk about the 2 IELTS modules, which should help give you a clear idea of which test you need to take. The IELTS test is an example of a standardized test, so it's important to understand what standardized testing means. We're going to take a pretty comprehensive look at the IELTS format. The quick discussion based on the 2 modes of delivery, the paper-based or the computer-delivered test. And finally, we're going to look at some test day information. I'd like to start off by pointing out that IELTS is actually an acronym, which means each of the letters stands for something. So do you know what the full form of IELTS is? I'll give you 10 seconds to write down what you think each letter stands for. Great. So if you wrote down the International English Language Testing System, great job. You hit the nail on the head. But what is the IELTS test? It's a test designed to assess the English language ability of people who intend to study or work where English is the language of communication. It is globally recognized, not only in the English-speaking world like the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States, but in practically every country in the world. The test format is the original 4 skills test, and it tests international English. One of the unique features of the IELTS test is that it has a face-to-face speaking test component. And as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 modes of delivery, paper-based and computer-delivered. You'll get the results of the paper-based test in 13 days, and the results of the computer-delivered in 3 to 5 days. In terms of deciding which IELTS test is best for you, it's important to become familiar with the 2 IELTS modules. The first one is the academic module, and this is for test takers who plan to join a university or college, or for professional registration or recruitment purposes. And it assesses the ability of the test taker to study or train at undergraduate or postgraduate level. The general training module, on the other hand, is for test takers who plan to immigrate or who need to take the test for vocational, secondary education, language training, or work experience purposes. And it assesses the test taker's survival skills in a broad social and educational context. The simplest and best way to figure out which IELTS test is best for you is to check with the receiving organization. The IELTS test is assessed on a 9-band scale, starting from band 1, which denotes a non-user, all the way up to band 9, which denotes an expert user. Please feel free to pause the video if you would like to read the descriptions in more detail. Once you've completed your IELTS test, you will be given what is known as a test report form, or TRF, which will contain your information as well as a detailed breakdown of your test results. One personal copy of the test report form will be sent to you, and up to 5 electronic report forms can be sent free to receiving organizations. If there are more than 5 copies required, however, there will be a courier charge. Now, I mentioned at the top of the video that the IELTS test is an example of a standardized test. But what does that mean? What is a standardized test? What does it mean for a test to be standardized? So I'm going to give you about 10 seconds, and I would like you to write down your ideas. What is a standardized test? Great. Let's take a look. So standardized test is one that is conducted under the same conditions and marked according to the same assessment criteria, no matter where the test is conducted or when the test is conducted. And these are the 2 reasons why the IELTS test is globally recognized and accepted. But in terms of preparing for the IELTS test, it has another meaning, which is something that is maybe more important for us at this point. And that is, the IELTS test is one that has the same format. And what I mean by that is the structure of the test in terms of things like duration, the number of questions, the number of parts. All of those things are things that stay exactly the same. They do not change. So the IELTS test has a standardized format. And the first step for preparing for this for the IELTS test is to become familiar with the format of the test. And that is exactly what we're going to do in this video. IELTS sets the standard in English language proficiency standardized testing. And it assesses the 4 basic skills in the English language: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. If you notice that there's something very important about what you see on the screen right now, and that is the fact that this is the sequence of the test. You start off with the listening, then reading, followed by the writing, and finally the speaking. There is a bit of variability and flexibility in terms of the speaking. So for example, in countries like India, which have a large number of test takers, the speaking might be conducted on a different day. Or if you choose to do the computer-delivered test, you might be asked to do the speaking test in the morning, followed by the rest of the test later on in the day. But the listening, reading, and writing sequence always stays the same. It never varies. And what we're going to do now is we're going to take an in-depth look at each part of the test and figure out how they're constructed in terms of the format. Starting off with the listening part of the test. So I'm going to start off by asking you. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to write down what you know about the listening part of the test. Think about things like the duration of the test, how many questions there are, how many parts. So 10 seconds to write down what you know about the listening part of the test. All right, great job. Let's take a look. So the listening part of the test actually lasts for 30 minutes in terms of the audio time. The recordings will last for 30 minutes. And if you choose to do the paper-based test, you will get an extra 10 minutes of what is known as transfer time, or time to transfer your answers. So while you're listening, you can answer questions directly on the question paper. And then at the end, you'll be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the official IELTS answer sheet. If you are planning on choosing the paper-based test, it might be a good idea to practice transferring answers because that is something a lot of people make mistakes with. There are a total of 40 questions distributed over 4 parts, so 10 questions per part. And one very important thing to keep in mind is each recording will only be played once. You do not have the option to listen to a recording a second time. So we've identified that the listening test has 4 parts, but how those 4 parts are structured is also standardized, is also fixed. It never changes. So in part 1, you're always going to listen to a social or transactional conversation between 2 people in an everyday context. So for example, maybe somebody booking a hotel room or opening a bank account. Part 2 will always be a monologue or one person speaking set in an everyday social context. In part 3, you will listen to another conversation, but this time between 2 to 4 people set in an education or training context. So for example, maybe a professor talking to his or her students in a tutorial, or the question and answer session after a presentation. Part 4 is again a monologue, but this time in an academic context. So maybe a lecture about an academic topic. If you look closely, you should notice a pattern. So what that pattern is a helpful way to remember how the listening part of the test is structured. So you'll notice it goes conversation, monologue, conversation, monologue. The first 2 are general, the last 2 are academic. Great. Let's take a look at the task types that you might come across in the listening part of the test. And before I show you the task types, again, I'm going to give you about 15 seconds. And I would like you to write down as many task types as you can think of that you might come across in the listening part of the test. So 15 seconds to write down as many task types as you can think of. All right, great job. Let's take a look. So in the listening part of the test, you might come across multiple choice questions, matching questions. You might be asked to label a plan or map or diagram. You might be asked to complete form, notes, table, flowchart, or summary, sentence completion, or short answer questions. Another extremely important thing to remember is the questions are designed so that the answers appear in the order they are heard in the audio, which means that the answers will show up sequentially. While you're listening, the answer to question number 1 will always show up first, then question number 2, then question number 3. So they will show up in the same order. In terms of how the listening test is marked, every correct answer is worth 1 mark. And in the IELTS test, there is no negative marking. So there's no penalty for answering a question incorrectly. Which means what? Because there's no penalty or no mark deduction, you should never leave a question unanswered. Even if you're not sure, just guess. Because again, like I said, there's no penalty for an incorrect answer. This is a rough approximation of how the raw score out of 40 will be converted into a band score. So generally, in order to get a band 7, for example, you'll need to get a minimum of 30 out of 40. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that there are going to be a bunch of mini tests in this video. So this is the first one. I'm going to show you 2 questions, and I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to write down your answers, and then we will check. So here are your 2 questions. All right, amazing. All right, let's check the answers. So the first question, how long is the paper-based listening test, including transfer time? If you chose B, that is the correct answer. 40 minutes, about 30 minutes of listening and 10 minutes to transfer your answers. What about the second question? You will get to listen to the recordings twice. The correct answer is B. No, you will only get to listen to the recordings once. Let's move on to the reading part of the test now. Same thing. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to write down what you know about the reading part of the test. Again, think about number of questions, how long the reading test is going to last, and maybe the number of sections. All right, great job. Let's take a look. So the reading test will last for 60 minutes or 1 hour. This is inclusive of transfer time. So you're not going to get any extra time to transfer your answers. And it consists of 3 sections totaling 2,150 to 2,750 words and contains 40 questions. This is one part of the test where there's a slight difference between the academic and general training modules. So in terms of the academic module, all 3 sections will have long texts that are usually taken from books, journals, magazines, and newspapers, and are more relevant to study. The general training, on the other hand, still has 3 sections, but the first 2 have shorter text, while the last one has a longer text. The shorter text can be taken from notices, advertisements, handbooks, or official documents. The longer text, again, from books, magazines, or newspapers. But they're more relevant to life and work in an English-speaking country. Now, in terms of the format, the duration of the test, the number of sections, the number of questions, everything is exactly the same. In essence, the only difference is the source of the passages or the type of passage in each of the modules. Let's take a look at the reading task types. Again, I'm going to give you 15 seconds, and I want you to write down as many reading task types as you can think of. So 15 seconds to write down as many reading task types as you can think of. Your time starts now. All right, let's take a look. So on your screen, you will see the range of reading task types. Just take a second to compare and see if you came up with the same ones. You'll notice that there are many that are similar to the listening test, but there are a few that are unique. So for example, identifying a writer's views or claims or matching headings. One important thing to keep in mind is that the task types are the same for both the academic module and the general training module. So you could get, for example, multiple choice questions in the academic reading module or in the general training reading test. You could be asked true, false, not given questions in both reading tests as well. So again, the only difference is the source of the passages. In terms of marking, just like the listening part of the test, 1 mark for every correct answer. And again, there's no negative marking. So do not leave any question unanswered. This is a rough approximation of how the academic reading test is going to be converted from a raw score out of 40 into a band score. And the same thing for the general training reading. If you look closely, you'll notice that there is a difference between the way the scores are converted. So if you look at a band 7 in the academic reading, you will generally need a minimum of 30 out of 40. But in order to get the same score in the general training reading, you will need to get 34 out of 40. So even though a lot of people think that the general training reading is easier, the marking is a bit more stringent or difficult. So time for your second mini test. Again, I'm going to show you 2 questions. Again, I'm going to give you 15 seconds to write your answers down before we check. So 15 seconds to answer these 2 questions. All right, so let's take a look at the answer. So how long is the reading test? If you chose C, that is correct. The answer is 60 minutes or 1 hour. And the task types in the academic and general training modules are exactly the same. The answer is yes, they are exactly the same. Remember, again, the only difference is the source of the passages. Great, let's move on to the next part, which is the writing test. In the writing test, you will get 1 hour or 60 minutes, and there are 2 tasks that you will need to complete. How you spend the 60 minutes is up to you, but the sort of generally recommended time allocation is a maximum of 20 minutes for task 1 and at least 40 minutes for task 2. Now, in terms of task 1, this is the second point of difference between the academic module and the general training module. In the academic module, in task 1, you will have to prepare a report based on some sort of visual information. So it could be a graph, a table, a chart, or diagram, and you will have to write a minimum of 150 words. Let me show you an example of what the visual information could look like. So you might be given a graph like this, and you have to use the information that you can gather from here and write or prepare a report. The general training, on the other hand, requires you to write a letter requesting information or explaining a situation. The word requirement is exactly the same, a minimum of 150 words. Again, let me show you an example. So the task will give you a general outline of the situation, tell you who you need to write the letter to, and also what you need to cover in the letter, which is what those 3 bullet points are towards the end. Task 2 is the same for both the academic module and the general training module. And you will have to write an essay in response to a point of view, argument, or problem. This time, the word requirement is a minimum of 250 words. Again, let me show you an example of what a task 2 question might look like. So children who are brought up in families that do not have large amounts of money are better prepared to deal with the problems of adult life than children brought up by wealthy parents. To what extent do you agree or disagree with this opinion? In terms of how the 2 tasks are marked, there are fixed parameters or assessment criteria. So task 1, the first assessment criteria is task achievement. As the name suggests, whether you have achieved or completed the task. The second assessment criteria is coherence and cohesion. This has to do with the overall structuring and internal linkage. The third assessment criteria is lexical resource, which is a fancy way to say vocabulary. And the fourth assessment criteria is grammatical range and accuracy. Your ability to use a range of grammatical sentence structures and whether they're technically correct or not. In terms of task 2, the first assessment criteria is task response. This deals with how clearly you state your position and how you're able to justify your position. The other 3 assessment criteria are exactly the same. There's more information in the writing self-study guide, and you will find a link to the public band descriptors, which will give you a detailed breakdown of the assessment criteria and what examiners are looking for. So it's time for your third mini quiz. Again, 2 questions related to the writing part of the test. And again, I'm going to give you 15 seconds. All right, time's up. So let's look at the answer. So how long is the writing test? The correct answer is C. The total time is 60 minutes. And the second question, in the general training module, you will have to prepare a report in task 1. The answer is no. In the general training module, remember, you will have to write a letter. And let's round off by looking at the final part, which is the speaking test. Remember, a unique feature of the IELTS speaking test is that it's going to be a one-on-one face-to-face interview with a certified IELTS examiner. So you're not going to have to speak to a computer. You're going to be speaking to a living, breathing human being. The speaking test consists of 3 parts and lasts for about 11 to 14 minutes. Just like the listening part of the test, the structure of the speaking test is fixed. So what you're going to have to talk about in each part is also standardized. So part 1 is the introduction or interview, and you'll be asked basic questions about familiar topics, and this lasts for about 4 to 5 minutes. So for example, the examiner might say something like, let's talk about accommodation, and ask you a series of questions. Let's look at some of them. What kind of accommodation do you live in? How long have you lived there? What do you like about living there? And what sort of accommodation would you most like to live in? Part 2 is known as the long turn, where you'll be given 1 minute preparation time, followed by a 1 to 2 minute talk on a topic chosen by the examiner. So the whole thing will last about 3 to 4 minutes. Let me give you an example of a topic you might be given. So this is what you will be given by the examiner, this entire thing, which is known as a cue card. Describe a movie that you enjoyed watching. You should say what kind of movie it was, where you watched it, what it was about, and why you liked it so much. Great. So let's move on to part 3. Part 3 is going to be a discussion. You will be asked abstract or general questions related to the topic in part 2. And this will last for about 4 to 5 minutes. So remember the topic that we just looked at, the topic was describe your favorite movie. So I'm going to give you about 15 seconds, and I want you to write down examples of questions you might be asked in speaking part 3. Remember, related to the same topic, movies or cinema. So 15 seconds to write down some abstract or general questions you might be asked. Great. So let's look at some questions you might be asked and compare them with the ones that you've written down. So you might be asked, how have movies in your country changed since you were a child? Do you think film stars are good role models? Do you think people will stop going to cinemas in the future? So these are abstract or general questions. You have to be careful. So for example, if you have written down something like, why did you like the movie? Or how many times did you watch the movie? Those are follow-up questions and not the type of questions you will be asked in part 3. In part 3, you will be asked abstract or general questions like the ones you see up on the screen. In terms of how the speaking test is marked, again, there are 4 assessment criteria. The first one is fluency and coherence. So your ability to maintain a conversational flow. Again, lexical resource, so a fancy way to say vocabulary, grammatical range and accuracy, and the last assessment criteria is pronunciation. Again, I would encourage you to look for the link to the speaking public band descriptors in the speaking self-study guide. Again, it will give you a detailed breakdown of the assessment criteria and what examiners are looking for. You will be assessed on a scale of 1 to 9 in each of these criteria, and your overall score will basically be the average of all 4. So time for your last mini test. Again, 2 questions, again, 15 seconds. I'm going to put the questions up on the screen now. All right, let's look at the answers. So the first question, how long is part 1 in the speaking test? The correct answer is 4 to 5 minutes, the same as part 3. And the second question in part 2, you'll be given 2 minutes to prepare. The correct answer is no. Remember, you have only 1 minute to prepare. Congratulations if you got all of the answers correct. This is a visual summary of the test format, everything that we've covered. And if you notice, the total test time is about 2 hours and 44 minutes. You can add an extra 10 minutes if you were planning on doing the paper-based test. Remember, in the IELTS test, you have a choice of the mode of delivery, paper-based or computer delivered. We're not going to go in a lot of detail in this video because the next video takes an in-depth look at both modes of delivery. But just some key points. There's no difference in the actual content of the test. The content of the test is exactly the same. The only difference is how you basically input your answers. There's no difference in the value of the results, which means getting a band 7 in the paper-based is exactly the same value as getting a band 7 in the computer delivered. In fact, the mode is not mentioned on the test report form. So on the test report form, it doesn't actually indicate whether you took the paper-based test or the computer delivered test. And you are free to choose between the modes of delivery where both are available. So what does that mean? In terms of a choice, it's based completely on your personal preference and convenience. The computer delivered test was developed as a way to make the test more accessible by providing more locations, more frequent test availability, the ability to get your results quicker, 3 to 5 days, and the opportunity to register later. So you can register much closer to the test day. Again, I would encourage you to watch the webinar on the computer delivered IELTS test for more information. And let's wrap up with some test day information. So you will be provided with a pencil, eraser, and sharpener at the test center, and you may be able to bring your own pen or pencil or eraser as long as they're unlabeled. So you can check with your local test center. But one thing that is almost universally applied is you cannot take your mobile phone and or watch inside the test room. There will be a storage space outside for you to sort of store your personal belongings, but you will not be able to take them into the test room. You're only allowed to have a pencil, pen, your ID, and an eraser on the desk. You cannot bring food or drink into the test room with the exception of water in a transparent bottle. So make sure you have something to eat before you actually start the test. Another thing to keep in mind, there are no breaks during the exam. And if you need to use the toilet during the test, put your hand up to attract the invigilator's attention and don't disturb other test takers. You will not be given additional time. And that brings us to the end of this video. I wish you the best of luck preparing for your test and hope you get the score that you're aiming for. And I hope that you found this useful. Thank you.